The day before her parents returned, Karen came to Mr. Harold's house. She sat across from Sydney at the kitchen table, folder in hand, face serious but kind. Sydney, I want you to know what's going to happen. Sydney nodded, gripping her glass of water. We have enough evidence. The videos you recorded, the medical reports from school, the credit card statements, your mother's emails. She paused. When your parents return, there will be legal action. Legal action? They'll be charged with child endangerment. It's a felony in Colorado. Karen's voice was gentle but firm. The police will be involved. Sydney swallowed. Will they go to jail? That depends on a lot of things. But at minimum, they'll be arrested and processed. And Sydney, you won't be going back to live with them. Not right now. Sydney should have felt something. Relief, fear, anger. Instead, she just felt empty. When? She asked. Tomorrow, when they're home. Karen hesitated. Sydney, your mother is planning a party, a welcome home party, 40 guests. Sydney knew. She'd seen the Facebook post. We've decided to execute the warrant at the party, Karen continued, not to humiliate them, but because we know they'll be home. There will be witnesses for safety. She looked at Sydney carefully. Sometimes the truth needs to be seen. That night, Sydney couldn't sleep. Her mother was at the airport right now, probably complaining about the long flight, probably already planning her outfit for the party, probably thinking about the Instagram caption she'd write. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Sydney looked out Mr. Harold's window at the street. Quiet, dark. 2 police cars would be parked around the corner tomorrow. The day her parents came back, the Denver sky was perfectly clear. 40 guests were on their way, and so was the truth. The welcome home party started at 5 o'clock. From Mr. Harold's living room window, Sydney watched cars pull up to her house, one after another. Neighbors, Diane's coworkers, friends from her book club, people who had liked her Instagram posts, people who believed in the perfect family. Through the front window, Sydney could see the decorations, balloons, a banner that said, Welcome Home, a slideshow playing on the TV photos from Europe, probably. Diane stood in the living room wearing a new dress she'd bought in Milan, hair freshly done, smile radiant, working the room like she was born for it. Diane, you look amazing. Tell us everything about the trip. We missed you so much. Sydney watched her hug guests, laugh, gesture toward the slideshow, the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, Santorini sunsets, every photo a performance, every smile a lie. One guest asked something. Sydney couldn't hear the words, but she could read her mother's lips. Sydney? Oh, she's tired. Resting in her room. You know how kids are at this age. She didn't know Sydney wasn't in her room. She didn't know Sydney wasn't even in the house. Sydney watched the slideshow change. Diane and Robert toasting champagne in Monaco, Diane shopping in Milan, Robert on a yacht somewhere blue and beautiful. Not a single photo of Sydney. Mr. Harold sat beside her. You okay, kiddo? I don't know, Sydney said honestly. Then she saw it. A dark sedan pulled up at the corner, unmarked. Karen stepped out of the passenger side. 2 uniformed officers got out of a second car behind her. Mr. Harold put a hand on Sydney's shoulder. On the TV inside Sydney's house, the slideshow ended. Diane raised her champagne glass, ready to make a toast. The doorbell rang. Diane opened the door with a smile already on her face, probably expecting another guest. The smile froze. Karen Oilerin stood on the porch in her blazer, holding a folder. Behind her, 2 police officers in full uniform, a woman named Officer Nguyen and a man named Officer Brooks. Mrs. Mitchell. Karen's voice was calm, professional. I am Karen Oilerin from Child Protective Services. These are Officers Nguyen and Brooks. We need to speak with you. Diane's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, fury. She settled on a tight smile. I'm sorry. Now isn't a good time. I'm hosting. Ma'am, this concerns the safety of your daughter. Behind Diane, the room had gone quiet. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward the door. The slideshow of Europe still played on the TV, photos of the Colosseum cycling silently in the background. Diane tried to step outside, to close the door behind her. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately," Officer Nuon spoke. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have a warrant. You and your husband are being charged with child endangerment under Colorado Revised Statute 186401. The words hung in the air. Someone in the crowd gasped. Whispers started. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. "That's ridiculous." Diane's voice was strained, but she was still performing, still smiling. "There's been a misunderstanding. Sydney is fine. She's upstairs right now." "Ma'am." Karen stepped forward. "Sydney is not upstairs. She's been in protective custody for the past 4 days." Diane's smile cracked. "What?" "Your daughter was found malnourished and alone. She documented everything." Karen held up the folder. "We have video evidence, medical records, and financial statements obtained through legal subpoena." The room was dead silent now. 40 guests stood frozen with champagne glasses in their hands, watching Diane Carver, the woman who had just shown them her Santorini sunset photos, being read her rights. Diane spun toward her guests, desperation cracking through her composure. "This is a misunderstanding." Her laugh was too high, too sharp. She's an imaginative child. She makes things up. There was a babysitter." "Mrs. Mitchell." Karen's voice cut through. "We've verified. There was no babysitter, no Mrs. Johnson. No one visited your daughter for 30 days. That's not. We also obtained your credit card statements through legal subpoena." Karen opened the folder, reading calmly. "You spent $47,312 during your trip. 5-star hotels, Michelin star restaurants, designer shopping." She looked up. "The supplementary card you left with Sydney was never activated. She couldn't use it. You left an 11-year-old with $20 in cash for an entire month." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Robert Sterling stood frozen near the TV, face white as paper. He hadn't said a word since the police arrived. "Robert?" One of his coworkers stepped toward him. "Is this true?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Jessica Hart, Sydney's teacher, who had been invited because she was a neighbor, stepped forward. "I'm Sydney's teacher," she said, voice steady. "I'm the one who filed the mandatory report. I watched that child come to school hungry, exhausted, wearing the same clothes for days. What you're hearing is not an exaggeration, it's what happened." Diane turned on her. You did this?" "No, Mrs. Mitchell." Mrs. Hart didn't flinch. "You did this." The room went silent. Then Officer Nuon stepped forward with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Diane's legs buckled. "No, no, wait, this can't." Karen looked at Officer Brooks and nodded. "Play it." On the TV, the slideshow disappeared. A video took its place. Sydney's face, Sydney's voice. "Today is day 15. The refrigerator has 1 egg and expired milk. I have $3 left. Mom is in Monaco." Sydney's voice filled the living room. On the TV screen, Sydney stood in front of their refrigerator, the same refrigerator these guests had walked past to get their champagne. She opened it on camera, nearly empty. A single egg. A carton of milk with an expiration date that had passed. "Today is day 15, video," Sydney said, voice thin and tired. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." The camera showed the bathroom scale, 83 pounds, down from 92 when her parents left. "Mom posted a photo from Monaco today. She's eating at a restaurant that costs $300 a plate." Video, Sydney's voice cracked. "I ate half a pack of ramen. It was the last one." Someone in the crowd, a woman in a blue dress, covered her mouth. The video changed. Day 18. Sydney reading her mother's email aloud. "Stop being dramatic, Sydney. You have everything you need. Don't call me again." Her voice was hollow. "She wrote this while I was hungry enough to feel dizzy." Another video. Day 22. The email where Diane threatened to call Sydney mentally ill. From Mr. Harold's window, Sydney watched the guests' faces. Horror. disgust, disbelief. Diane was screaming now. Turn it off! She's lying! She's Mrs. Mitchell. Karen's voice was steady. These videos were recorded by your daughter on the iPad you gave her. They are time stamped. They match the medical records from her school. They are evidence. Mrs. Hart spoke again, addressing the room. I saw Sydney at school. The weight loss, the exhaustion, the unwashed clothes. It all matches what you're seeing. Diane looked around wildly at her coworkers, her neighbors, her book club friends. No one would meet her eyes. Even Robert had stepped back from her. Sydney watched her mother standing alone in a room full of people who finally saw the truth. She knew the exact moment it hit her. Diane's face went through every stage denial, bargaining, rage before settling on something Sydney had never seen from her before fear. She looked at the screen, where Sydney's video was still playing. She looked at the 40 guests, their champagne glasses now lowered, their faces stony. She looked at the police officers with handcuffs ready. And then she said the words Sydney would never forget. No. Her voice was a whisper at first, then louder. No, no, this can't be happening. But it was. Robert tried to speak. Diane, maybe we should. Shut up! She spun on him, mascara starting to run. This is your fault! You never paid attention to her! You never. My fault? Robert's voice cracked. This trip was your idea. You said she'd be fine. You said, I said she was old enough. She's 11. She should be able to. To what? The voice came from the back of the room. An older woman stepped forward. Martha Keller had known Diane for years, sold her home insurance, attended her dinner parties, commented gorgeous on every Instagram post. Mrs. Keller's face was hard now. To what, Diane? Starve? Feed herself on $20 for a month while you ate oysters in Monaco? She shook her head slowly. I've known you for 15 years. I thought I knew who you were. Diane's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. For the first time in her life, Diane Carver had no performance left to give. Officer Nuwan stepped forward. Ma'am, sir, you need to come with us now. Diane looked around one more time, searching for an ally, a defender, anyone. The room looked back at her with 40 pairs of eyes that had finally stopped believing. No one moved, no one spoke, no one saved her. They walked Diane and Robert out the front door in handcuffs. Not dragged, not screaming, just walked. Diane's face was blank, like she'd left her body somewhere between the living room and the porch. Robert kept his head down, unable to look at anyone. The guests parted to let them through. No one said goodbye. No one offered support. No one stepped forward to say, there must be a mistake. Outside, neighbors had started gathering on their porches. Word travels fast in suburbs. Mrs. Chen from across the street, the Petersons from the corner, the family with the golden retriever who always waved at Sydney. They watched in silence as Diane and Robert were guided into the back of a police car. Through Mr. Harold's window, Sydney saw her mother pause before getting in. For 1 second, she looked up at the house, at the welcome home banner still hanging in the window, at everything she was about to lose. Then the officer's hand guided her head down, and she disappeared into the back seat. The car pulled away. Sydney kept watching until the red taillights vanished around the corner. Mr. Harold stood beside her. He didn't say anything, just put a hand on her shoulder. Back at the house, the party was over. Guests were leaving quickly, quietly, heads down. No one wanted to be associated with what they'd just witnessed. The champagne sat untouched. The slideshow had been turned off. The welcome home banner fluttered in the breeze from the open door. Karen appeared on Mr. Harold's porch a few minutes later. She knocked softly. Sydney! She stepped inside. How are you feeling? Sydney thought about it. I can breathe, she said finally. For the first time in a month, I can actually breathe. Karen nodded. That's a start. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, the police cars were gone, the neighbors had gone back inside. And Sydney was still here. Before this continues, some of you might be thinking, does Sydney regret it? She's still her mother after all. The short answer is no. Sydney doesn't regret telling the truth. She didn't destroy her family. Her mother destroyed it long before she ever opened her mouth. Sydney just stopped covering for her. If you're in a similar situation, if you're wondering whether you have the right to speak up, the answer is yes, you do. The day after the arrest, Aunt Ruth appeared. Sydney was sitting at Mr. Harold's kitchen table eating scrambled eggs, real scrambled eggs, with cheese and toast when there was a knock at the door. Mr. Harold answered it. A woman stood on the porch, mid-30s, brown hair like Diane's but softer, tired eyes but kind. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, no designer labels, no perfect Instagram aesthetic. I'm looking for Sydney, she said. I'm her aunt, Ruth Delaney. Sydney froze. Aunt Ruth. The Aunt Diane hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The aunt whose name made Diane's jaw clench whenever it came up. Mr. Harold looked at Sydney. She nodded. Ruth stepped inside. The moment she saw Sydney, her eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Sydney. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't know it was this bad. Sydney stood stiff at first. She wasn't used to being hugged. Then something broke inside her, and she hugged Ruth back. How did you know? Sydney asked, voice muffled against Ruth's shoulder. Mrs. Hart called me. She found my number in an old emergency contact file from years ago. Ruth pulled back, looking at Sydney. I came as fast as I could. They sat at the table. Ruth held Sydney's hands while she talked. Your mom and I stopped speaking 5 years ago. Do you know why? Sydney shook her head. Because I told her the truth. Ruth's voice was sad but steady. I told her she was more obsessed with her image than with actually loving you. She didn't want to hear it, so she cut me off. She squeezed Sydney's hands. Sydney, what happened to you is not your fault. Your mother was wrong, and now you have me. Sydney looked at this woman, this stranger who shared her blood but had been erased from her life. You barely know me, Sydney whispered. Then let's change that, Ruth smiled. I've already filed for temporary guardianship. CPS approved it this morning. For the first time in weeks, Sydney felt something that wasn't hunger or fear or exhaustion. She felt hope. The legal system moved fast. Diane and Robert were charged with child endangerment, a Class 3 felony in Colorado. They posted bail, but the conditions were strict. No contact with Sydney, not a phone call, not a text. Not even through a lawyer without CPS approval. The evidence was overwhelming. Sydney's video diary, 22 recordings, time-stamped, showing the empty refrigerator, the bathroom scale, her gaunt face, reading Diane's threatening emails aloud. The school's medical report, 9 pounds lost in 3 weeks, signs of malnutrition documented by a licensed nurse. The credit card statements, $47,000 spent in Europe. Five-star hotels, Michelin restaurants, designer shopping in Milan. Meanwhile, the supplementary card they'd given Sydney showed zero transactions because it had never been activated. Diane's own emails. Stop being dramatic. Don't call me again. I'll tell them you're mentally ill. Their lawyer tried to spin it. A misunderstanding, an oversight. The parents believed arrangements had been made. But you can't argue with timestamps. You can't negotiate with bank records. You can't explain away a child who lost 9 pounds while her mother ate oysters in Monaco. The news spread through Denver like wildfire. Couple spends $47K on European vacation. Leaves one-year-old with $20. Diane's real estate consulting clients dropped her within a week. We can't have this kind of publicity, they said. Robert was put on administrative review at his construction firm. Their names were in the papers, on local news, shared in Facebook groups. The Instagram account, the one with 12,000 followers, the one full of blessed and grateful, was deleted. But screenshots had already spread everywhere. A week after the arrest, Diane called Sydney through her lawyer's number. Sydney. Her voice was strange, smaller. If you take back what you said, if you tell them you exaggerated, we can fix this. I promise I'll change. Sydney held the phone for a long moment. Then she answered. Mom. Her voice was calm, steady, nothing like the scared 11-year-old who had begged for food 3 weeks ago. I have 22 videos. I have your emails. I have the credit card statements that CPS subpoenaed from the bank. I have the school nurse, my teacher, my neighbor, and a caseworker who all saw what you did. Silence on the other end. You had a month to change, Sydney continued. Every time I called, you told me I was being dramatic. You threatened to send me away. You spent $47,000 on yourself while I ate half a pack of ramen a day. Sydney, I'm not finished. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been silent for 11 years. You didn't forget to activate that card. You didn't forget to arrange someone to watch me. You just didn't care. I wasn't part of the vacation. I wasn't part of the Instagram photos. I wasn't part of anything because to you, I was never really part of this family. She heard her mother's breath catch. I don't hate you, Mom. And she meant it. Hate would require energy she didn't have. But I won't lie for you. And I won't talk to you again until I'm 18 and I can decide for myself. Sydney, please. Goodbye, Mom. Sydney hung up. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else, something that felt like freedom. Ruth was standing in the doorway. She'd heard everything. Are you okay? She asked softly. Sydney thought about it. I think so. She looked at the phone in her hand. I think I just said everything I needed to say. Ruth crossed the room and hugged her. I'm proud of you, she whispered. That was the hardest thing, and you did it. Sydney didn't cry, but she held on tight. That was the last time she heard her mother's voice for 7 years. 6 months later, they went to court. Sydney wasn't there. Ruth and Karen agreed it would be better for her to stay home, to hear the result afterward rather than watch her parents stand before a judge. But Karen told Sydney everything. Diane and Robert took a plea deal to avoid a trial. Their lawyer had advised them. The evidence was too strong, the public sentiment too damning. A trial would only make it worse. The sentence: 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent mark on their records: child endangerment. A felony conviction that would follow them forever. But that wasn't the real punishment. The judge revoked their parental rights permanently. Parents have a sacred duty to protect their children, the judge said, according to Karen. You chose a luxury vacation over your daughter's safety. You left an 11-year-old alone for 30 days with $20 and a credit card you knew didn't work. This court cannot, in good conscience, return this child to your care. Ruth's guardianship became permanent that same day. Sydney was officially hers. Diane cried in the courtroom, not quiet tears, heaving sobs that echoed off the walls, but Karen said it didn't feel like remorse. It felt like grief for her reputation, her image, the life she'd built on Instagram likes and dinner party compliments. Robert said nothing. He'd barely spoken since the arrest, just a hollow man in a suit watching everything collapse. After the hearing, Karen came to Ruth's apartment with paperwork. It's done, she said. You're safe now, Sydney. Legally, permanently safe. She handed Sydney an envelope. Your mother wrote you a letter. She asked the judge to pass it along. Karen paused. You don't have to read it. Not now, not ever, if you don't want to. Sydney took the envelope. It was heavy in her hands. I'll decide later, she said. She put the letter in her desk drawer. It stayed there for 7 years. Life with Aunt Ruth was different. She lived in a small apartment in Boulder, no two-story house, no perfectly trimmed lawn, no Instagram-worthy aesthetic, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with mismatched plates, and a couch that had seen better days. It was the warmest place Sydney had ever lived. This is your room, Ruth said on Sydney's first day, opening a door to a small space with a twin bed and an empty bookshelf. I know it's not much, but we can decorate it however you want. Your choice. My choice. Sydney had never been asked what she wanted. They ate dinner together every night. Not fancy dinners, sometimes just pasta with jarred sauce or grilled cheese and tomato soup. But Ruth sat across from her, asked about her day, actually listened to the answers. I'm not perfect, Sydney, Ruth told her one evening. I'll make mistakes, but I promise you 2 things. I'll always be here, and I'll always listen. Sydney didn't know what to do with that promise. Part of her kept waiting for Ruth to leave, to get tired of her, to decide she was too much trouble. She never did. 3 weeks in, Sydney came downstairs and saw something on the kitchen calendar. Ruth had written in purple marker, Sydney's basketball tryouts, 3 p.m. Sydney stared at it. Diane had never written her events on a calendar. She'd never known when tryouts were, or recitals, or parent teacher conferences. Half the time she forgot to pick Sydney up. You remembered, Sydney said. Ruth looked up from her coffee. Of course I did. I want to be there. If that's okay with you? Something cracked open in Sydney's chest. Yeah, she whispered. That's okay. Ruth smiled. And for the first time, Sydney let herself believe that this was real, that Ruth wasn't going to disappear. It took a year to trust that Ruth would stay. It took 2 years to stop checking the refrigerator every morning just to make sure there was food. But slowly, Sydney started to heal. 6 months after the sentencing, Sydney learned about the money. Ruth sat her down one Saturday morning, a folder of documents on the table between them. Sydney, there's something you need to know about your grandmother's estate. Sydney blinked. Grandma Eleanor had died when she was 7. She barely remembered her. She left a college fund in your name. Your parents couldn't touch the principal, but they were supposed to manage it for you until you turned 18. Ruth opened the folder. As part of the court proceedings, that fund has been transferred to a trust supervised by the court. Neither your mother nor your father can access it anymore. Sydney looked at the number on the page. It was more money than she'd ever imagined. This is mine? Yours. For college. For your future. Ruth's voice was firm. No one, not me, not anyone, can use it without the court's approval until you're an adult. Sydney thought about Diane's shopping sprees in Milan, the five-star hotels, the $47,000 spent in a month while Sydney rationed ramen. Could they have used this before? She asked quietly. Grandma's money? Ruth hesitated. The principal was protected, but they had some access to the interest. She sighed. Let's just say the court reviewed everything. They won't have access to anything of yours ever again. Sydney sat with that for a moment. What happened to their house? She asked. They sold it. Had to. Legal fees, the settlement, the costs of everything. Ruth closed the folder. They moved out of state. I don't know exactly where, and I don't need to. Sydney nodded slowly. She didn't feel happy about them losing the house, but she didn't feel sad either. It was just consequences. Actions have consequences, even for parents, especially for parents. Thank you, Sydney said to Ruth, for protecting this, for protecting me. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's what family does, sweetheart, the real kind. By the time Sydney was 13, she had clear boundaries. No direct contact with Diane or Robert. Every message, every request had to go through Karen or a lawyer. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no running into each other at the grocery store. The first year, Diane tried. Letters forwarded through her attorney, requests to Karen for just a short phone call. Once she showed up at Ruth's apartment building, the security guard turned her away. Each time, Sydney said no. Her therapist, Dr. Reeves, whom Ruth had found for her, helped her understand why. You're not punishing them, Sydney, Dr. Reeves said during one of their sessions. You're protecting yourself. There's a difference. But she's my mother. Sydney picked at the edge of the couch cushion. Isn't there some rule that says I have to forgive her? Dr. Reeves leaned forward. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. It's a choice you make for yourself when you're ready. If you're ever ready. She paused. And even if you do forgive someone someday, that doesn't mean you have to let them back into your life. Sydney thought about that for a long time. So I can forgive her without seeing her? You can forgive her without ever speaking to her again. If that's what you need, forgiveness isn't a ticket that lets someone back into your life. It's just letting go of the weight for yourself. Sydney nodded slowly. I'm not ready, she said. Not yet. That's okay. Dr. Reeves smiled gently. You don't have to be. 7 years later, Sydney received a letter. Not through a lawyer this time. just a plain envelope in the mailbox, forwarded from an address she didn't recognize. The return address was in Arizona, Diane's handwriting. Sydney held the envelope for a long time before she opened it. She was 18 when she finally read both letters. It was August. She was packing for college, full scholarship, pre law program, a future she'd built herself. Her dorm room was waiting, her new life was waiting. But first, she needed to close this chapter. She sat on her bed in Ruth's apartment, her room now, with posters on the walls and photos of her and Ruth at basketball games and her bookshelf full of worn paperbacks. She had both envelopes in her hands. The first was from 7 years ago, the one Diane had written after sentencing. Sydney opened it. Sydney, I know I was wrong. I don't know how to apologize because no one ever taught me how. My mother left me too, left me with relatives for months at a time while she traveled with her new husband. I thought that was normal. I thought children were supposed to be fine on their own. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. I just want you to know that I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to understand why I am the way I am. And if you ever want to talk, I'll wait, however long it takes. Mom. Sydney read it twice. Then she opened the second letter, the one from a few months ago. Sydney, I heard you got into college. Full scholarship. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. You did that yourself, despite everything. I'm still in therapy. I'm still trying. I don't know if I'll ever be the mother you deserved, but I'm trying to be a better person. I won't ask to see you, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Truly. Mom. Sydney put both letters down. Ruth appeared in her doorway. You okay, kiddo? Sydney thought about it. I don't know if I believe her, she said honestly. I don't know if she really changed. You don't have to decide right now. I know. Sydney folded the letters and put them back in their envelopes. But I think I might be okay not knowing. At least for now. Ruth nodded. That's more than enough. Sydney didn't write back. Maybe someday she would, maybe not. But for the first time, it felt like her choice. And only her choice. The day Sydney left for college, she stood on the campus quad and looked back at everything. Not physically. Ruth had already driven home, waving from her car with tears in her eyes and a proud smile on her face. But in her mind, Sydney traced the path that had brought her here. She remembered the 11-year-old girl sitting in an empty kitchen, counting $20, wondering if she could survive a month. She remembered filming herself in front of an empty refrigerator, voice shaking, not knowing if anyone would ever see those videos. She remembered Karen asking, "Do you want to be safe?" and realizing it was the first time anyone had given her a choice. She remembered Ruth showing up at Mr. Harold's door, a stranger who became family. She remembered standing in that kitchen, phone in hand, telling her mother, I won't lie for you. 7 years since that summer, and here she was, healthy, educated, whole, not because someone rescued her, because she rescued herself. She'd been taught that speaking up was betrayal, that silence was loyalty, that good children didn't cause trouble. It took starving alone in her own house to understand the truth. Silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the people who hurt you. Sydney looked around the quad, students laughing, carrying boxes, starting new chapters. Her chapter, her life. She pulled out her phone and texted Ruth. Made it. Room's nice. Thank you for everything. Ruth replied instantly. So proud of you. Always. Sydney smiled. Someone behind her asked directions to the library, a girl about her age, looking lost. Sydney pointed her the right way, and they ended up walking together, talking about majors and hometowns and hope. The past didn't disappear, it never would, but it didn't own her anymore. People ask Sydney sometimes, if you could go back, would you do anything differently? The answer is always the same. No. She doesn't regret telling the truth. She doesn't regret the videos, the reports, the day the police walked into her mother's perfect party. She doesn't regret standing in that kitchen and telling her mother she wouldn't lie. The only thing she regrets is that she had to wait until she was starving to understand that she deserved better. If you're reading this and you recognize something, if you grew up invisible, If you were the scapegoat, if you learned to shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort, Sydney wants you to know speaking up is not betrayal. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from the people who were supposed to protect you. Diane left Sydney with $20 and a card that didn't work. She thought Sydney would be too scared, too obedient, too desperate for her love to ever speak up. She was wrong. Sydney survived that month. She documented every day. She let the truth speak for itself. And when the consequences came, when Diane stood in her own living room, surrounded by her perfect guests, watching her perfect image shatter that wasn't revenge, it was just reality catching up. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up. Ruth showed up, Mr. Harold showed up, Mrs. Hart and Karen showed up. The people who love you will never ask you to starve for them. Diane and Robert left Sydney with $20 and a locked credit card. But Sydney walked away with something they could never give her: the truth, her boundaries, and a life that belongs to her. And that is the only happy ending she needs. If this story reached you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered whether you had the right to speak up, Sydney hopes you know now. You do. You always did.